Good afternoon. Welcome to the gathering and welcome to this very special time we get to spend with Larissa Lam and Baldwin Chiu, the filmmakers of Far East, Deep South. And I'm so sorry I forgot to warn you to have some tissue at hand. What a moving and touching movie. My name is Peter Huang. I am one of the leaders of the gathering and also a priest in the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles. The gathering was started in 2017 as a ministry of our diocese for Asian Pacific Americans to gather together in a space created for APA spirituality, for a place to tell our stories, to share and collaborate with allies, and to be empowered for change. We are part of the Episcopal Church and specifically in the Diocese of Los Angeles. So I want to welcome our Bishop Suffragan, Diane Jardine Bruce, to say a few words and pray for our time together.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be with you all today. My name is Diane Jardine Bruce. I'm the Bishop Suffragan here in the Diocese of Los Angeles and a great supporter of the gathering of the Reverend Peter Huang and all of the gathering team. So welcome to this time of question and answer. And I too was very sad that nobody told me. I ended up having to go and get a box of tissues. So there should be a disclaimer at the beginning of the film, just saying. So let us pray. Gracious and holy God, we give you thanks for the gift of family, extended and immediate. We give you thanks for Larissa and Baldwin and for the power of the offering that they've given us today in this movie. May its witness to the truth open the eyes of many who see it and who will see it. And may the ongoing whitewashing of our history end. In this time of conversation and questions, may hearts and minds continue to be opened. And this be the start of many stories like it. So the truth can be exposed and seen for what it is. May it be told boldly as this movie tells such a bold and important story. We ask this and give thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bishop Diane. And I also want to introduce the Reverend Katie Nakamura Rengers, who will be moderating our Q&A with me today. Katie is an Episcopal priest in Birmingham, Alabama, and serves as the officer for church planting in new Episcopal communities for the Episcopal Church. Thank you, Katie, for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Peter. I'm excited.
So before bringing on Baldwin and Larissa, here's how we'll work this out today. Ask your questions in chat, and members of the gathering planning team will sort through the questions, and Erica Bertling from the gathering will then share the questions with us. So without further ado, Larissa Lam is an award-winning director for Finding Cleveland. She's also a writer, producer, award-winning singer. We heard her song as you were waiting and also in the film. In addition to hosting a talk show and public speaking to inspire and empower others in the arts, Larissa also hosts a podcast with her husband, Baldwin Chiu, and it's called Love, Discovery, and Dim Sum. Baldwin Chiu is an award-winning producer, also for Finding Cleveland, and an actor, motivational speaker, and rapper known by his stage name, Only One. And Baldwin speaks frequently on panels addressing race, immigration, and Asian American representation in media. They're each very accomplished, and there's so much more that you can learn about them on their website, fareastdeepsouth.com, and encourage you to to visit them there. Baldwin and Larissa, we are so thrilled to have you here with us today and so glad you can share this film with us. Good to have you here with us.
Hi, everyone.
How's everyone
Greetings
doing?
from Los Angeles. So we are very, very glad that you have invited us here to speak with you all, and glad you're able to enjoy the movie and shed some tears if your eye ducts were dry like mine are.
It's good to see some familiar faces as well. So thank you all for letting us be a part of this.
So it's definitely our pleasure. Baldwin and Larissa, tell us about yourselves, particularly you've done so many interesting things. Why this film? Why must this film be made? And
we can show you the reason why this film could be made.
Yeah.
Okay, come here.
Okay, we have
There's
a Zoom
little
bomber.
Zoom crasher here. Here we go. This is Kalia.
Eating a banana.
Yeah. You saw her. She was much younger in the video. Yeah.
So yeah, this is our reason. And are you going upstairs to play now, or what are you doing?
Finishing my banana.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All
Yeah.
right.
You all know this is a pandemic reality. Working with kids at home. She was a lot of the reason. I think both Baldwin and I grew up in California, not knowing much about the Asian role in American history, aside from the railroads and the gold mines and the Japanese internment camps. Nowadays there is more of a push. They're going to be teaching the Chinese Exclusion Act in schools now, and that's a great thing. But we had no context for what our role in America was. And I think that perpetuated this idea that we didn't belong. Personally, I'm a second generation. I always forget to mention that because people ask like, well, what about your side of the family? My parents were born in Shanghai, and because of the Cultural Revolution, their families left to Hong Kong. And then they came to the United States in the 1960s, which is a very typical pattern for many of us that are second generation in this country. Little did I know that there were so many other Asian and Chinese experiences that were very different than mine that stretch several generations like Baldwin's. And you pretty much saw what happened and what Baldwin knew and what he discovered.
Yeah. So my background is, I'm a musician as well. We've been working in entertainment for a long time, but I'm also a mechanical engineer. And a lot of times, and someone just asked if my parents have seen the film, and yes, they've seen the film many times. They've actually one of the few people to see it in a live theater, if you remember those days when you can actually go inside and see a big giant screen before they shut it all down. But yes, they have seen the film. And
I was most nervous about showing it to his dad because, he's a private person, and I know this is very, he's very vulnerable, and this is such a deeply, deeply personal journey, as you guys all saw. And so I didn't know how he was going to react to me putting it on the screen for the world to see. And it certainly was something he had to get used to when we told him, there's a lot of people that are going to watch your film, and there's going to be even more people watching your film in the coming months.
I think they're on this call somewhere.
So
I just got a text saying that they're here somewhere.
I don't know if they want to show their face. They're very shy, but yes, hi, Mom and Dad.
So I'll have to be careful on what I say.
But certainly, having come from a music background, I've worked in the music industry for over 20 years, and has been involved in music and TV ministry, and this was a new foray, and I really felt like this was my time, I guess, to tell the story, because nobody had really told it in this way, and really just the amazing things that happen. And so I like to credit God for giving me the inspiration, and really God is a better writer of storylines than I am, because I would never have made this up. This had to have been real. Nobody would believe me, and I had just written this as a fictional story, but you all saw this really happened.
And it's funny too, because it does take a while for us to make this film. It took a lifetime, really. But, like God prepared me, even as I was doing engineering and being a senior project manager and up the ranks there. It really prepared me to be a filmmaker because of all the projects I managed, and I was able to really when the story came about in our family, I was able to help really manage and produce this film and organize it and work with different filmmakers, you know, like Larissa as a director and writer, and our editor and all our camera people and timing and all that stuff. It's crazy how God worked that into my life to say, like, you are going to be an engineer for many, many years of your life, and you will probably continue to be one, but this is so that you can be prepared to be a filmmaker and know how to organize and make something like this. So,
and we bought a nice camera just because we had a daughter, and we figured, oh, like if we want some really nice pictures of our daughter, rather than always going to photo studios, let's have a really nice camera. And instead we used it to make a movie.
That's so beautiful. Baldwin and Larissa, something Peter didn't say about why he invited me to come and kind of help host this Q&A is that I'm Asian American and I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama.
Yeah.
So, you know, we always say, like, thank God for Mississippi, you know, or we like 50th and everything, right? So the film was like surprising to me, like in that way. I was also like, hey, whoa, Chinese people in Mississippi. And I mean, it seems like it's so much about, okay, what role have Asian Americans played in the past, but also like what role are we playing now? And the moment, you know, just about an hour ago that I was really tearing up about was when someone was talking about how the Chinese Americans would sometimes go up and sit in the balcony seat.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, with the African Americans. And, you know, I mean, I was born in '85, so that hasn't been my experience, but kind of the residual experience of being kind of in between this, these races that are, yeah, I mean, you know, not at war, but have so much tension, kind of the black and white dynamic in the South. And I don't know, I just wonder a little bit about what was going on inside you when you were hearing some of that and piecing it together in this film.
Yeah, I mean, you think it was tear-jerking to watch it in the film. It was tear-jerking to hear it live. And even when I recall, you know, those moments when we heard those stories, I was like, oh my gosh. And you know, I remember I was there with Willie Jackson when he brought up the story. And then I was sitting next to him. You don't see me in the film, but I'm like right next to him managing the microphone. And I'm like, did he just say that? Did he just, that's an amazing story coming out of your mouth, right? It's not like a story that I heard, but this is direct from somebody from the Black community saying that. And then I can't remember who mentioned it first. Was it our interview with Willie or was it with Frida?
I don't remember which
said it, right?
first.
Frida said it.
Yeah.
Frida said it. And she's Chinese, right, from the South, and she's talking about her family.
Right.
And she said the same exact thing, but 2 separate days, 2 separate times. We never discussed anything.
And I think that was the thing about when we decided to explore that side of the story. So the first trip where you guys saw, we found the Bible. That was, you know, like one day's events, and so of course we were just overwhelmed by that, but we had so many questions, like probably many of you did, is just like, oh well, they were Chinese there, but what was their role and what was the relationship with the Black community? And so I think that's why we wanted to go back, why we wanted to make a feature-length film. You know, we did a short called Finding Cleveland that was mentioned, that was 14 minutes, was just based on just that first day, but there was so much more to the story. And of course we were also scared of what we would find because of the knowledge of what is with the tensions today. We're like, oh, well, we're gonna kind of maybe open up a big Pandora's box here, and you know, but we thought we owed it to, even if it was going to be very negative, we owed it to ourselves to find out what that truth was, because we felt we couldn't paint a picture, just like, you know, we've been kind of washing over the Asian experience in the South. Like, we're not going to, you know, wash over the Black experience in the context of their relationship with the Chinese too, since they had to live in the same neighborhood. So it felt weird to not tell that story and not include them in the story. And so we went out to go find people from the community. We were pleasantly surprised. And just to know, this is how different time periods throughout history can be so different, you know, because most of this is happening like pre-1960s, you know, pre-civil rights. And in fact, there's a few scenes we cut where some members of the Black community had actually said, well, you know, we actually felt sorry for the Chinese at first because they were even viewed even lower than the Blacks when they first came into the Mississippi Delta. And And, you know, again, given today's construct, that's not like how we would think modern day, but that also just shows you how race and perception of race has changed over the years. And we're hopeful that, again, that can change for the better as well. But, you know, certainly we didn't expect to see such a, you know, such a positive experience with the Chinese back then. In fact, you were just on the phone with Cheyenne Woodruff, who was on the film, and she talked your ear off for another like hour. And a lot of them were grateful that we asked them, because nobody actually had. And this is also showing you where I think this is what we can learn today too, is because a lot of times we make assumptions about the other groups, because we actually started asking a lot of, you know, Emily Jones at the museum, or some other people that were white, oh, hey, do you happen to know any Black professors, or, you know, people in the Delta, you know, that we could talk to that maybe have lived in those neighborhoods? And she was like, oh, good luck with that. They're a tough nut to crack. And I think because those racial dynamics are still at play in the South, that there is still some tension between the mistrust between the Black and the, you know, the white communities. You know, a lot of the Black community, I don't think is as open to talking with people from the white community. But I think the moment, especially that Baldwin said, like, my grandfather had a store here, there was a kinship, and all of a sudden, like, they opened up and they were like, thank you so much for asking, because, you know, nobody's ever asked us what we've thought. Nobody's asked us, you know, how we felt. And we're so glad we could tell you.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you.
I'm so appreciative that the invitation to tell these stories that likely have been untold for generations, literally. And I'm just thinking what that was like, you know, this historical part of it, you know, what was it like this time going as Chinese Americans, you know, engaging the different communities, and then learning about what had happened, you know, in these generations past. How was that, just being in the Deep South?
Well, it's kind of funny because, like, you know, when we first thought about going there for the first time, I had some reservations, because you only know what you see on TV. You know, you hear about Mississippi burning, and, you know, and all these, like, you know, racist things that goes on over there. And I was like, and then I had people saying, like, are you really going to go there? Because, like, you know, what if you don't make it back? Right? Just all these weird things about, like, how terrible it must be. And then when we got there, it was very different. It was, you know, that whole Southern hospitality thing. And I'm not saying that there aren't parts of those areas that are racist, and, you know, you can experience those things. But when we got there, it was, we didn't have that. And it was a very surprising, and it made me check, you know, like, myself, like, why was I even scared? Why was I even listening to these things? You know, like, why was I even apprehensive about coming here in the first place and thinking that I'm going to have to defend my family or something? And it just made me check, like, what is the content that we are watching and observing and taking in media and in our communities about groups of people, you know, whether they're white or Black, you know, like, what are we taking in? So it was a pleasant surprise when we got there. In fact, we like to say, like, people weren't surprised to see us. They weren't like, oh, there's a Chinese family here. They were more like, oh, there's a Californian family here. What the heck are people from California doing out here?
They everywhere we went, we were the California family. Like, nobody referred to us, there's a Chinese family looking for their, you know, grandfather's grave. You know, we were the California family, and that's what made us, like, different. And, you know, even as we kind of think about, like, the last few years as we've been making the movie, we've gone back several times, and we've, you know, always had a positive experience in the Mississippi Delta. You know, as Baldwin says, we can't speak to certain other regions, you know, or even what people say behind our backs. We can't attest for that. In fact, we had a kind of a, you know, racist incident here. We live in Pasadena, California, you know, and that was jarring to us, because we think, like, oh, we live in a very multi-ethnic city, we live in a fairly progressive city, and yet when we've had racist incidents occur, they've actually been here. And even in the wake of the pandemic and anti-racist, you know, incidents happening, the majority of them have been happening in California and New York, and places with large major cities with Asian populations, and not necessarily the rural South. And so that's just something, you know, I don't have answers for all that, but that is something where we can't just think, oh, we just got to educate the people in the South about Asians. You know, I think we have to educate, you know, everybody about not just Asians, but all the different races races, on all the different experiences, because we clearly have a problem in the country, regardless of where you are.
That's just so funny. When my parents got married, my mom's parents were so nervous, not because his parents were Japanese, but because they were Yankees. Because like we're always finding some way to be other, right?
Yeah. That's interesting. That's funny.
Absolutely.
I know Katie and I have other questions too, but we want to see what our audience participants have. Questions for you. I know that the chat's been lighting up. And Erica, what do we have for Baldwin and Larissa?
Hi, thank you so much for sharing this film with us. We have been getting a lot of really amazing feedback and stories, and we'll of course provide you the chat transcript later so you can read them on your leisure, and appreciation for all of the work that you did. I was gonna just start off by like reading a couple of those because it leads into one of the questions. Sylvia says, wow, what a great film. Thank you to the producers who all were involved in getting this film off the ground and into the viewer's orbit. We are better off than we were an hour ago just by watching this film and getting a better understanding of the Chinese immigrant experience. And Tom says, it's a great documentary. I respect those who paved the way for other Asians. And Ruth says, the personal quest of this lovely family shows how much we humans desire connection. Thank you for sharing your family with all of us. And as we know, discovering that your father loves you makes all the difference in the world. So the question here, I think that's coming out, and also that I've heard from some others, is what is it about hearing our stories told that is so powerful? And also maybe how can we perhaps engage in that kind of storytelling with our own families? Because we saw you tackle some pretty difficult topics there and really face that there was so much pain with your father learning about his father. And so how can we engage in that kind of storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the funny things is every time I had to interview or talk with Baldwin's dad, I had to kick him out of the room.
Yeah. So maybe the first point is
don't be the primary source
don't be
of
the primary subject.
Maybe ask the grandkids or a trusted friend, because I think also, now being parents as well, I kind of understand. I think you always view your kids as your kids and you don't take them seriously, or even vice versa. As kids, sometimes we don't take our parents seriously. And so I think me coming into the picture was able to open up some of it. But also I think the circumstances, because when we were writing down, there's a scene in our film where we're writing down in the van, and Baldwin's dad is giving a little bit of background about, Baldwin's asking all these questions. And that was like the first like major conversation you've had. And I think the trip itself was the catalyst for it, because like your dad, I mean, it's like a 2-hour drive from, we technically had to stay in Memphis because those are where now there's a lot more major hotels in.
That's where the airport was.
But the airport is in Memphis. You can't fly into Cleveland, Mississippi. And so we stayed at a hotel near Memphis, and then we drove 2 hours down to Cleveland, Mississippi. And your dad talked almost the whole time because you asked him questions about your family. And that was the first time you had heard any of this. So
my dad would argue that he's told us stuff before and we were just too naive and too young to want to listen to him. That's what he would say. That would be his argument. But from my recollection, that was probably the first time I got that full story.
Yeah, so I think certain like photographs, any artifacts, like things that can prompt a conversation and foster, this dialogue. I mean, I hope people, one of the things that we hope with the film, and before things shut down and this pandemic, with our short film, we used to go all around the country at different museum schools, churches, and show the film. And a lot of times, like a lot of the churches would be like, oh, we're just going to invite the youth. And, this is a great story for the youth, or vice versa. Like, oh, we're just going to invite the adults and we're not going to invite the youth. And we're like, no. Can you invite everybody and invite your Chinese congregations or your older congregations too? Because we really feel it's a multi-generational film and that it's a catalyst for people to talk about it. Because as grandkids, a lot of times we don't ask the older generation. As grandparents, a lot of the older generation doesn't tell the younger generation. And so, that was one of the things, is that you need sometimes that catalyst. And we really hope that our film can be that tool and that catalyst to help open these conversations. But start asking now. Get out paper, get out a recorder. Everybody's got a recorder on their phone, just whatever it is. You don't have to make a fancy documentary. Just start recording those stories.
Yeah, and I hope it's not I would think that it'd be hopefully easier now than before, because film was expensive, right? You can't just take pictures, and, you know, recording devices were expensive, and now you can just do it on your phone. But now we have so much media that I'm afraid it gets lost, right? Or we're worried about an electromagnetic thing and pulse, and then all of it goes away. But for like my parents, I mean, my dad, he had pictures, physical pictures that have lasted, and to be able to sort through them is so different than I think when I'm going on my computer, on my Google Drive, trying to find pictures that did something ever happen, right?
Yeah, and a 16mm film reels that were buried in a closet somewhere that nobody saw until just a few years ago.
but I would like to challenge you guys, because someone from we've been talking to the National Genealogy Society and people at Roots Tech, and one of the questions that they bring out is, and I'll ask all of you, and you guys can either raise your hands, I can see some of you, or you can just answer in your head, but like, how many of you know your great grandparents' names, right? And the question and the answer that a lot of the genealogy people are saying is, most people would not raise their hands. A majority of people would not know the names of their great grandparents, and may not even know much about, and you know, and even if they didn't know their names, they wouldn't even know anything much about like what they did or much about them. And then they said to us, imagine in 2 generations that nobody will know you. And I was like, huh. And they said, that's because if you don't tell your story, then in 2 generations, it'll be gone. Just like you didn't find out. Your great grandparents may not be alive now, and you will never know because you never talked to them, or they never talked to you, or they never talked to your parents. So
yeah, and then a great resource, we'll actually share a screen at the end, but there's a major genealogical conference coming up called Roots Tech. It's happening online this year. It's completely free to register. We're going to be doing a session on documenting underrepresented family stories, but there's a whole host of other speakers. Some of you may know Nick Vujicic. He's actually one of the keynote speakers this year at Roots Tech as well. And Family Search is the one that sponsors it, but there's a lot of programming if you want to delve into how to record keep or how to find more about your lineage. Yeah. Encourage you to sign up for Roots Tech. It's February 25th through 27th, and we'll have a graphic later on to show you.
But talk to your kids, talk to your grandkids. You just have to do it.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Sometimes broaching those conversations can be difficult, but the rewards are obviously really pretty profound. So another question that that's here is, Alan says, what do you think is the message of Far East Deep South to the faith community, particularly in current times?
Wow. Yeah, we made the film, you know, partially with that community in mind. We had a lot of great experiences working with a lot of churches with Finding Cleveland, and what our model with that is, we had a lot of Asian American organizations or advocacy groups, genealogical groups, historical societies that were interested in showing our previous film, and they didn't have venues. And so one of the things we discovered is like, well, we would love to like partner with churches that have venues as a means of obviously bringing people into the church and opening up this, you know, having helped churches open up the space for community. Initially, we actually had a lot of resistance because people felt like our film wasn't Christian enough from the church. In all the screenings we did, like there's never been one person that has said your film is too Christian, but we've only had the church say like it's not Christian enough. So with this film, you know, when my father-in-law sat and shared his testimony, and it was so tied into the overall story. I never wanted to throw it in just for the sake of having his testimony in there. And I was so happy because I'm like, yes, I can throw this, you know, I can throw in his testimony, and it really speaks to his condition and is so powerful. And so for the benefit, if not for just the church, but for those that are not, you know, in the church. And, you know, for us, we really hope, I know the pandemic has changed things, but we really hope we can help the church engage in some of these dialogues, especially about racial reconciliation. And we did some screenings with some Southern Baptist Chinese pastors and some Black pastors last year in the wake of George Floyd. I think somebody I saw, you know, had mentioned that, and so this sort of answers that question too. We really felt a responsibility that our film could be a tool to help educate our community. I mean, I think initially, prior to a lot of that, you know, we were thinking, we just like, oh, people need to know about the Chinese experience and, you know, an Asian experience here in America that they don't know, which is still true. And that's a huge part of our mission. But, you know, kind of another mission that we have is certainly like, I think a lot of times, you know, people in our community are, you know, maybe they're not going to watch a film with like, you know, an all Black cast because they're first generation immigrants and they can't relate to that experience. You know, however, we hope we can help educate a lot of those in the Asian community, again, especially a lot of the newer immigrants, about the history in the South. And because now there's a connection, and we hear that from teachers in schools, where a lot of times they say a lot of their Asian American kids will, like, they'll do this essay, they'll fill in the blanks, but they don't really, you know, feel a connection to Black history. But now, you know, with this film, hopefully we can build those bridges. And you know, our hope and our model is, and we're starting to talk with some other churches about this, is having Black churches and Asian churches or multi-ethnic churches dialogue, you know, and using our tool as kind of a means of starting that conversation.
Yeah, and also with the film, I mean, I think with the film, it shows what the church did in the South. Like the current conditions was that the Chinese could not go to the schools, and the Chinese went to the Supreme Court. You know, if you know your history, they tried to get them, you know, with Lum versus Rice, to try to get into the schools, and they lost. And so what happened?
Because they were classified as colored.
So what happened? It was the church that came in and said they saw a need, and they were the ones that started those mission schools so that the Chinese could finally have schools to go to. And when I think about what message should this convey to the church, I think a lot of times, you know, Larissa mentioned, you know, like the church is really caught up in being evangelistic, and if your film or your speaking topic or your presentation isn't evangelistic enough, then there's no place for you to come and speak and present at our church. But I think our film shows that what the church did back then was, I mean, evangelism is probably part of it, but what they saw was a need. They saw a community that needed love. They saw a community that was being hated on. And they saw a community that had a need and had a strong desire to have their kids in school so that they can break out of whatever systemic racism or whatever's going on. So the church, out of love, said, we're just going to build a school. We're going to let you come to our church. We're going to designate some volunteers to educate your people and teach you English. And we're going to follow the second greatest commandment, which is to love our neighbors. And by doing that, we're going to follow the first great commandment, which is to love God. And I think that's the message I think I would love the churches to see when they see our film, is to bring us back. Yes, we want to share the gospel. Yes, we want people to go to heaven and experience those things and live in a lifestyle that's glorifying to God. But ultimately, we just need the church to love.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the words social justice and racial justice tends to get politicized, you know, in this day and age. And so, you know, we can strip that language, you know, but I mean, let's just look at what Jesus did. You know, Jesus was for standing up for those who didn't have a voice, who were mistreated, you know, who were the least of us. And I think, you know, with our film, you know, we hope to remind people that there were, you know, churches, and mainly, you know, a lot of church leaders that were the ones trying to push for a desegregation. They were really, you know, at the forefront of it. And a lot of times, I know even media, like, you know, we can paint a broad paintbrush across what evangelism, you know, what a Christian looks like. And so we really hope that, you know, those who are, you know, for racial reconciliation and for making change in a positive manner, you know, will see this as an encouragement.
Thank you. You managed to answer a lot of questions in there. And that's great, because I think these things are not separated. You know, we don't need to compartmentalize how this works in, you know, the church versus outside of the church, or in the Asian community versus in the Black community. It's all of these things are connected and tied together. And I feel like your film really showed that to great advantage. One other question that's come up, though, about the content in the film is Jenny would like to know if you've made any new discoveries about your family and other relationships since the film was made, because you've said you've returned to Mississippi since. And also wondering, Patricia would like to know a little bit more about Chinese communities in the Deep South, how many there were most of them storekeepers because of limitations, or other occupations. So maybe if there's any more kind of like behind the scenes rest of the story that, you know, you would want to share at this time for our audience.
I'll answer part A and you can answer part B.
Okay.
Part A would be, we have recently discovered, so you watched our film based on my father's side of the story. And for this whole time, I was just focused on that, ignoring my mom and, you know, which I shouldn't. Because
yeah, we just thought, you know, your mom was born in Hong Kong and then she came over when she married your dad. And that was kind of the story.
Yeah, so my mom's got a typical Chinese story, probably. Well, it turns out that as I was going through all my emails, going through, you know, all this archival stuff, archiving our film, I found an old email where my mom sent me a couple of pictures, and it was about my grandfather on my mom's side. And apparently this letter came from Denver, Colorado. And then there was also, it was a picture of a letter from a lawyer, and it was also a picture of some sort of documentation about residency, I believe.
Yeah,
right?
It was a certificate of like legal residency for your great grandfather.
And I was like, Mom, what is this? And she was like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that. Ask your uncle. He's the one that sent it to me. So I WhatsApped my uncle. I was like, hey, do you remember these documents? You sent this to my mom. Apparently, he goes, yeah, your grandfather on mom's side was great-grandfather was a Chinese railroad worker. And he worked on the Transcontinental Railroad and eventually made his way into Colorado. And he tried to come back, but his lawyer found out that even though he was legally able to come back, his lawyer could not get the government to allow him to come back. So that's why,
because of the Chinese
Exclusion Act. So even though he
had legal papers to do. Yeah, he wasn't a citizen, but he did have legal papers.
And he was brought over here to work on the railroad and was still here because of the Chinese Exclusion Act. He went back on his own, probably just the same reason as most Chinese people did, was to get a wife, you know, and start a family. Mm-hmm. He wasn't able to come back. And his lawyer actually said in the letter, I'm sorry, I know you're supposed to be able to come in, but I just can't get them to let you back in. And this was a white lawyer. So that might be our next project. Information for us. We just discovered a few months ago. Not sure what we're going to do with it yet, but we're researching.
Yeah, and there was one other piece that we found that we didn't include in the film, where there was a keychain that Emerald Dunn, they were the family that bought the store. She found another piece that was this amazing keychain. I tried to figure out a way to work it into the film, but it just got to be too much, so it's not in the film. But it's a keychain that said, it was like a brass, I think, keychain that said, it was if found, return to Casey Lou. So we actually gave it to, I think his dad has it now. Casey Lou's not around, but we returned it to Casey Lou's son, his dad. And so I know it's pretty, like, we have so many touching moments, but it wasn't something that was discovered, you know, in the filming process. We did film a little scene where we gave it to him just to see what his expression is, but it just didn't really fit. We had so many overwhelming, like, discoveries. We just felt like we were kind of like just too much for the audience. So from a storytelling standpoint, we pulled it out, but it could be bonus material. And I think the other question was, Erica, what was the other question again about Chinese families in the Delta?
Just actually asking maybe a little bit more about the historical record of Chinese in the Deep South. Like, were they all merchants? And also another part of that question too is, how was Asian success punished in the same way that Black success was? And if so, how?
Yeah, so it started off with the Chinese were doing labor. They were working on farms. They were originally brought there to be plantation workers, and then eventually farmers and stuff. But then obviously it didn't really work out for them. And also the Chinese Exclusion Act said no more labor for the Chinese. So they were kind of forced to find an alternate way of doing business to survive and to work. Otherwise they would, you know, have to go back to China. So the things that they started doing was they did restaurants and laundries as well, but
not so much in the Delta.
Not in the Delta because you got to look at the land, right?
Yeah, I mean, Dr. John Jung, it was cut from our film, but he actually explained this, you know, who's in our film, where it made sense where you're in cities where people have to dress up in suits and etc. They need laundry, you know, and there's people that, you know, need to eat, they're out and about, they need restaurants. Whereas in Mississippi, it's a farming rural area. So everybody's clothes are dirty, but they're kind of not needing to be clean. They're not wearing suits and dress shirts to go to work. And so the need was more just essentials, groceries. And a lot of those groceries doubled as restaurants. As we found out, his great-grandmother was a very good cook. And so we hear, you know, testimonies from several of the residents, and not all that they made it into our film, that like, you know, she cooked, you know, braised pork with, you know, Chinese, she had a Chinese vegetable garden in the back. And so like their store was a place to get Chinese food in the neighborhood.
And the stores were also kind of general stores as well. So in Pace, it was right across the street from the railroad tracks. So every weekend, the railroads would stop and people would come out and they would shop in Pace. And a lot of things they would shop for was like utilities stuff. So like farmers needed knee pads, wheelbarrows, shovels, stuff like that. And so those stores, even though it was a grocery store, in the front, I think Emerald Dunn told me, in the front of the store, they sold farm equipment, you know, small stuff, not like big giant tractors or anything like that, but like, you know, stuff you like a hoe, a shovel,
yeah, she did say knee pads,
gloves, stuff like that.
Yeah, so even though the general category was like grocery stores, a lot of them specialized in different things. Like yours was like, your grandfather's store was like fancy meats and groceries.
Fancy meats and markets,
so maybe another one, I don't know, they might have specialized in vegetables, and, you know, or they might have sold other items. I think in the 1950s, at one point, I think there in the Delta, there was about 2,500 Chinese in the Delta, but over generations, I mean, that's thousands and thousands. And we're talking about, you know, I think a couple hundred like stores along the Delta, because again, all the towns were kind of spread out. And back then, you know, we're talking again, you know, pre-1950s, where, you know, cars were not exactly common with, you know, everyone. So there was basically a grocery store in every little town in the Delta that was owned by somebody Chinese. And so there was quite a lot of families.
And then something we also didn't include in the film, because we didn't know how to fit it in, and it was later, was that you know, Chinese people knew how to do side hustles. And so who did they do side hustles with? It was with the Black community, because one thing we were told that from Mayor LaVon Jackson, this was unfortunately he passed away, but we visited him afterward.
Yeah, it's not in the film.
It's not in the film. It was just hanging out with him. And he was like, yeah, we didn't talk about it much in the Black community because we get in trouble. Is that, you know, we couldn't borrow money from the white banks because they just wouldn't give us money. But then yet they gave us 40 acres and a mule. But then there's this fine print that says if you do not till your land within a certain amount of time, the government would take their 40 acres and their mule back. So what's the point of giving them 40 acres and a mule if in a certain amount of time they didn't have enough money to buy a tractor or buy a horse or buy a plow or anything to work the land? So what do? They went to the Chinese grocery stores and said like, hey, side hustle, you want to be my bank? You've been extending us credit for food. You know that we're good on our money. We got a little bit of land. I know you can't work on land. So how about we do a 30-70 split? We give you 30%. We do a side hustle. You lend us some money. We don't tell the government. We don't tell the banks. And you go in 30% and you come over and work the land with us, and whatever we make, you know, and I was like, oh my gosh, this needs to be a movie.
Yeah,
right?
It's not in art. It's like that was
movie,
another
right?
Another story. Well, and I think the Chinese, because of the Exclusion Act, which again was more out of the rise of what was happening on the West Coast. You know, that's why that law was enacted. And so, you know, the people weren't as angry with the Chinese in the South, but obviously the laws will still were in effect. But, you know, really the whole idea is they have to be merchants, you know, they're taking our jobs was a means of trying to punish the community in a different way. And so they thought like, well, we can drive the Chinese back to China because there's no way they can like afford a store to run it, to keep it. But they didn't realize the Chinese are really good at working around the system. So they would pool their monies, like several families would pull their money together to buy one store, because they're like, yeah, one Chinese person couldn't afford to buy the store and everything that went to go with it. But they figured out a way to make it work. And over time, they did curry favor, you know, like we heard stories about Baldwin's grandmother making almond cookies, you know, for one of the local people. And like they did curry favor with some of their vendors and other people. So as time went on, you know, I think they weren't punished as much for their success, but it was, you know, wasn't easy, you know, as the African-American community. But certainly like what Baldwin said, a lot of stuff was on the down low because they, you know, in some places they couldn't own land and they didn't want to get in trouble.
Yeah. I see a lot of questions, so I don't want to I want to try to blast through some of these.
There are, and sadly, we're actually out of time, but a lot of the questions that you're seeing there are actually people asking about how they can see this film again or other platforms for it. And I mean, just so that you can hear some of the, this is an important film to open honest conversations on racial reconciliation, also an excellent way to offer insight into a reality that so many white people were never taught or don't understand. So what other platforms is it available on? When will this important film be open for more wide release and use? And also people asking how they can access the soundtrack as well, because the music is well loved as well. So perhaps we can put those links in the chat, or if you can talk about how people can see this again. Or also we had some questions about being able to show it to our families, to our children. I can honestly, I have an 8-year-old and he really enjoyed this film and asked a lot of questions. So for those of you who have younger children, it's been home tested on them. So.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, for the easiest one is soundtrack wise, we have a Spotify playlist, and that's an easy way to get to our soundtrack. Some of the individual songs are available on iTunes, and
do you have a link to the soundtrack? I think on
it is. I believe it's on our website.
You go to Far East Deep South. We'll double check to make sure it's on there.
It's on there. I thought I put a Spotify link, but
if you have a Spotify account, you can access.
Just Google Far East Deep South, and there should be a playlist that pops up. And then in the individual songs from the different artists are going to be there. The score is not up yet. Eventually we will upload the score by the marvelous composer Nathan Huang, but if you like the songs themselves, there's a lot of them that are on our playlist. I'm going to share our screen.
Please do check out Cantonese Boy too.
Oh yes.
Yeah, share the screen. I'll start talking. So one of the things we have been able to do is, the first thing we want to do as filmmakers is to get distribution. And so we have educational distribution lined up first. And that allows the schools to be able to see it first. So Stanford was the first school to actually license the film. New Day Films is our educational distributor. So if you know people that are in schools or teachers or professors in universities, they can go to New Day Films. I think there's a link here somewhere.
Sorry, let me get my slides here. Here we go.
Can you guys see that? Hopefully you guys can see it.
Okay, hopefully you can see that.
Can you see that screen?
So
I can see it at least.
Okay,
yeah.
Good. Thanks. Cool. So these are some of the things we can do. New Day Films is licensing the films to universities.
And if you want to, we'll have our contact information on one of the next screens, but if you're wanting to organize a screening that's private specifically for your group and have a Q&A with us, etc., you can contact us directly.
Do something like what you're doing right now.
Right, what we're doing right now. And so, but yes, our whole mission is to broaden the way that U.S. history is taught in schools to be more inclusive of the Asian American experience. And the next screen. Oh, what just happened there? Let's see. Just a couple of things we had wanted to alert you to. I'm doing a session with an organization called Asian American Justice Innovation Lab this coming Wednesday. If you're interested in kind of furthering this conversation, especially in regards to the shared history of the Chinese and the Blacks and communities, we're not showing the film, but we're going to show clips from the film. So if you know other people that might be interested in this conversation, this is free to register. This is on our website on our front page, but feel free. There's also we'll try to, if somebody can drop the links in the website too, we can do that.
Yeah, you guys can do that. Someone can do that while we're speaking.
And then Roots Tech, I had mentioned as well. If you can drop the links on the Roots Tech as well. That will be later this month that you could register for. So those are a couple of resources that we wanted to give you. I'm going to go to the next screen. Please stay in touch with us. You can subscribe to our regular newsletter, and we're going to try to send a follow-up email to you guys with all these resources. I know it's very overwhelming. Follow us on social media, and I've left Baldwin's emails down here, but we're married. I don't know if that was clear in the beginning, but we are married. So we are in the same household, and feel free to email Baldwin. It really is him answering. Yes. And if you want to say something to me, he'll forward it to me. Feel free to reach out that way. And here's also previously mentioned our podcast, which you can subscribe to and listen to about different issues.
Is there more?
Yeah, and I think we just have, and then the other thing we just wanted to announce, because we were talking about getting it to more schools, is we just launched something called the First Class Initiative, where we are doing this campaign to introduce our film to 6th through 12th grade, although it's great that 8-year-olds are understanding this too, for teachers in the classrooms. And we know a lot of schools don't have access to the funds to be able to see the film. And so we are raising funds to let schools show it, or I should say teachers 6 through 12.
So what we also, so we do have, like I mentioned, we have educational distribution, which limits us from selling our stuff. We also have an announcement that we will be having a PBS broadcast in May for the wider audience. It's an edited version. It's a little shorter.
So you guys saw the full version.
You guys saw the full version. The PBS version will be a little bit shorter. We don't have an exact date yet, but also because of broadcast rights, it also limits us from selling DVDs. So our workaround is we want to invite you to be a part of this. And if you are able to donate to our First Class Initiative, which allows you to donate to a nonprofit which we're working with and get a tax deduction, we can give you a gift. And our gift to you would be, we would give you an autographed DVD. We have a poster. We have the CD from Larissa's album that has the song "This Road" in the credits. We can give you those gifts.
And the DVD would be for home use, which is different than the educational.
Right, you would
edition.
not be able to use it for public display or what do you call it?
For educational.
Yeah, you can't use it publicly. It's for home use only. All the educational stuff has to go through our distribution. But we can give you these personal gifts if you guys are able to donate 150 or more to our nonprofit.
Yeah, so those are some ways to be able to watch our film, but certainly we will continue to update you on the various things that we're doing that are in the works. And I'm going to stop sharing.
All right.
Thank you for all that very, very helpful information, because it helps extend this conversation, and it's so good to know that there are additional opportunities to engage this film. Baldwin and Larissa, I know, Baldwin, when we talked earlier in the week, you said you may have a little bit more time to spend with us.
Yeah, if you guys are willing to hang on, and we want to respect your time, but
yeah, if anybody needs to.
I think our daughter's playing upstairs, so get us while she's gone.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so for those of you, I know, you know, we mentioned going until 5 o'clock. If you need to sign off, please go ahead. But thank you for Larissa and Baldwin for giving us some more time to engage you two. But that's great news, what's happening with PBS. So really excited to hear that.
Yeah, we're excited too.
Yeah, we're definitely excited. It's been a long journey. When the pandemic hit last year, we honestly didn't know what was going to happen. Many of you, I'm sure, didn't know what was going to happen. So to come this far, we're very grateful.
Yeah. So yeah, let's answer some more questions.
Yeah, we're happy to answer some more questions. Some of the ones I didn't know if Erica wanted to
if you guys
them too.
Erica, were you able to scan through them?
I have a question.
Go for it.
Well, first of all, I want to give a shout out first to Baldwin, your mom, Rebecca Chiu. I just love how she just tells it as it is at times. I really love her spirit, and I was so moved by your dad too. The name, how important the name was, that he wanted to change it back, or to claim the Chiu name. I think just the significance of our names. I'm so glad for that. The question I have was part of an observation of how emotional this film was. And I know Katie and I talked about this earlier too, just especially as Asian Americans, sometimes, you know, we're known as the sort of the reserved, you know, being reserved and being more stoic, but yet the most, I just found myself connecting so much to all of you, to the ways that you, wasn't just the moments like with, you know, your dad discovering the Bible or reading the letter, but can you tell us a little bit more, both of you, just the journey with that and being able to, what you felt throughout the whole process and just being able to connect with each other through these experiences? And
yeah, I mean, I definitely think that my relationship with my father has grown. I think really wanting to know our history has made him feel like I actually care, you know. And I think, you know, when we're young, we do have a lot of things on our minds. You know, we're just worried about what's going on right here and now. We're not, I mean, for me, I hated history. So, I mean, it didn't matter if it was our history or somebody else's history or our country's history or anything. It just was not interesting to me. And I think most of it was because I didn't think it applied to me. I felt like all the history that I learned in school was for other people that were white, people that were Black. It was not for Asian people. So for me, history was boring and not necessary. But I think, you know, when we started this journey and I realized how significant our American history really is, and that our history is shared with people of other races, and then to find out, you know, just to start putting together how patriotic my father is, you know, when he served in the military, you know, he retired from the military, his flag is up there front and center in his living room. And I was like, wow, this is important, not just to our family, but to America. And I felt like that really brought me and my dad more together, because I think he always said, like, well, what's it matter for the world to hear my story? I'm just a nobody. I'm just a regular person, right? But I'm just like, no, we're all regular people, but that doesn't make us any less significant. And I think for him to now see, and for us to see that his normalness is actually significant, I think that has really allowed us to talk more and be more upfront, and you know, try to really want to learn more about each other and our families.
Yeah. By the way, I see some of my fellow UCLA Bruins like in the chat here. And so, yes, please tell, even though we are connected with some people at UCLA, it's always better if you've seen it and you give the recommendation and said, like, you've got to see this movie. So definitely, you know, if you know people on campus, or, you know, let them know, or suggest it. And, you know, we will too.
And if you know people that are in college, you know, like, I think we are on Canopy now,
as of a few days
ago.
ago.
So Canopy is like a big thing that college students use to watch.
Or if any of you are, you know, professors.
Or yeah, if you're professors, you can watch on Canopy, and that helps us a lot too, because it triggers licenses to be purchased. And so you can encourage your youth, your students, to watch on Canopy, and then, you know, maybe we could set up you know,
yeah, and we want to work with more student groups as well, on campuses to have these conversations as well.
Yeah, we definitely want them to know this history while they're in the process of making history of their own.
And I saw Erica put it, Canopy does have access through libraries. We are not on the library system.
Yes,
we're only on the
correct.
University system currently.
Yeah, so the Canopy's public library thing probably won't happen for another year. So right now, it's this the whole educational thing, you know, educational rights. They have first dibs. So I know it's unfair, but you'll get it eventually, or you can go back to school, get a school account.
Asians, we like a deal.
Yeah, well, PBS will be the time.
Yes.
That was one of the questions. How much shorter is the PBS documentary?
It's about 5 minutes.
5 to 10 minutes. It was less than 10 minutes, definitely.
Yeah.
So you're not missing a whole lot, but
there's some scenes just for
time,
flow and time.
Yeah, and they have some restrictions on time. They have to get their advertisements.
And I will say, you will get about the credit sequence that I did for PBS has some bonus footage. Yes. So it's a little shorter, but there's some bonus footage in the credits that was not shown in in this. So
we might have taken a few minutes away, but we found some way to put something new in.
Yes, we did.
And you'll be posting the announcement of when it'll air on your...
Yeah, we don't know the exact date yet.
They're hoping to know by the end of this month. But we have submitted everything. So
yeah, it'll be airing on World Channel America Reframe. So it will differ from market to market, but it's easy to, you know, I think Google that information when it's available. I mean, it'll be on our website, but you know, when the actual schedule of when it airs in your market will
perhaps those of you who are with us today who are on the Gathering mailing list, we can include this information as well.
Oh, great! Yes,
we will. Our next release. So, and then also just in that same very practical vein, there's questions about how, if there's anything different for churches to use it, and then also people who are interested in using it for employee resource groups in their
we've done several screenings for employee resources groups, so definitely contact us. We are happy to work something out to do a private screening. We are working on a discussion guide. We have an existing one that we have for our Finding Cleveland, but we're working on a new discussion guide specific for Far East Deep South. And we are actually have had many requests to do a Bible study, companion to our film, and so that is something that we will that we'll definitely be working on as well.
But as far as the screening goes, it's very similar to what we're doing today, whether it be a church group or a corporation or a community organization. Just contact us. We'll set up a private screening event. It's we used to just love going to these places individually and in person. But in some strange way, this pandemic was horrible for us, but was also great for us in that these virtual environments make it a lot easier for people to join in certain ways. So
yeah, definitely contact us. And we certainly, like to customize kind of each event to the needs of the organization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Larissa and Baldwin, if you have a minute, you're talking about these school groups and church groups, and that just makes me curious about what the reaction has been, maybe particularly among students. I saw in the comments somewhere they were mentioning, there was a mention of George Floyd, and I wonder if folks are making, the connection between the film and current events. How they responded?
Yeah, I mean, we have quite a bit of amazing testimonials from students that we started to gather from their teachers. And so we're really glad to hear, like in Portland, we had 2 history classes show the film, and I think their demographics was majority white. They had a couple of Asians sprinkled in there, but no black, no black, and some Latino, Latinx. And they were like, oh my gosh, we never knew this history happened. And actually, it was surprising to me. They said like the junior high students in this one group were like, we were crying at home watching this film, and they would watch it with their families because we set it up to where, we encourage them. We're like, hey, we know you're doing this for your class, but we really want your students to engage on this with their families, because we wanted to spark interest for them to talk about their stories with their families, right? It's not just a history of what happened, but to also find it hopefully as inspiration for you to learn about your own history. And so we really encourage the students to, with this virtual setting, to watch it at home with their parents, and they have. And we've gotten some nice comments from both the parents and the students.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I think that it's still early on as far as like how many people have been able to watch our film in an educational school setting. So, we're not sure. It's a lot of it's directed by the teachers in terms of like whether they have the discussion move in that direction or not. I think with the Black community, there's so much material, thankfully now, that is being pushed into the education system and resources that are very specific to that. But where the intersection between the Asian and the African-American experiences, I think a lot of those conversations are being held, currently outside of the school. We're hoping to go into more schools that maybe have a larger, Asian American population. I think that's where it'll come into play more. Yeah.
Oh, and answering some of these questions, yeah, it's perfectly okay if a college or organization hosts an event and then they open it to the public. So
locally.
So that would still be considered an educational event. You're educating the public, but it's still sponsored by an organization that's has education as their priority. So that's not a problem. Eventually it'll be made available to the public in about a year. We're still working all those rights. But for now, I mean, yeah, that's how it's going to be viewed. And I thank you, Tom, for that comment about my grandfather, Casey Liu, would be proud of my dad. If my dad's still on, Dad, I hope you know that, Casey Liu. Oh, don't make me teary-eyed. Yeah, I'm sure he'd be proud of you, Dad. And yeah. Oh man, I wasn't supposed to tear up.
But we all did. You just didn't get to see us. I think in your fundraiser donation pack, you're going to need to include a box of tissues.
That's funny. Georgia Pacific used to be one of my clients when I was doing a lot of engineering stuff. Georgia Pacific does tissue papers and napkins and stuff like that. I actually reached out to them. I was like, hey, do you guys want to sponsor some events? People are crying at our movies. So I got to probably follow up with their human resource and marketing department on that. See if they can donate some tissue boxes for us.
Yeah, I mean, I want to address a question that I see like Abraham has in here. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead for you, Erica, just because I know, you know, what's the story with Jumo's migration and Charles' birth certificate? I have mixed feelings about the ending. I almost felt like you were saying because Charles was born, I'm thinking Charles J. Liu was born in America, therefore American. And, you know, we've had this question before. This is not to negate the Chinese heritage at all. That was not our intent to negate it. And I think the film was framed. And this idea at the very beginning of the film is that, where are you from? Where are you really from? And I think those, a lot of us who have of Asian descent have faced that question, where the assumption, if you look at someone with an Asian face, is that they are not from America. You know, if you look at somebody white or you look at somebody black, you know, we've had these conversations with our black and white friends who are like, you know what, nobody's ever asked us, like, where are you from? Where are you really from? But it's an experience that a lot of us that, you know, might even be Latinx, like, have that same experience, you know, that they don't think we're automatically here. And sorry, they don't automatically think we're from here. And so that is the battle that we wage. And I think a lot of that, you know, and I think this film, the way I framed it was shortly after we had that incident where somebody was questioning, like, you're making some Chinese joke, you know, racial joke at us.
And also, I don't think it's uncommon for most Americans to be proud to be an American and at the same time be proud of where their ethnic heritage is from. So someone from Mexico, you know, they want to be Americans too, but they'll root for Mexico as well in the Olympics. Or, you know, someone that's black are obviously proud of their black and African heritage, but they're also very American. You know, they'll serve in the military just like we will. So I think this is saying we are also capable of being proud to be Americans, and we have proof that we are. Not only can we be proud to be a first generation American, we have proof that we can be 6th or 7th or 8th generation American and can be even more proud to be American, yet at the same time still be proud of where our ethnic background is. We can still be Chinese through our heritage. We can be proud of our history and our traditions.
Martha Wing says it in our film. That's one of my favorite lines.
Yeah.
You know, Martha Wing, she says,
we're proud to be Chinese.
We're proud to be Chinese, but American too.
too.
And we're not any different, you know.
So I don't think, you know, us wanting to be, to show pride and being American negates our pride in who we are from our ethnic background.
Yeah, because I mean, I have friends that are Irish American or Italian American, and they, you know, they are obviously accepted and proud of both heritages. And so I think, you know, that's definitely what we were trying to convey with that.
Yeah. Not quite getting that last one, like danger in the single story.
Oh, Suzanne is just pointing out that the danger of the single story, it's a TED Talk by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and it's one of the most listened to TED Talks, and it is about the danger of telling yourself that this one single thing that you know about many is the truth, is sort of the gist of that. There's a lot of complexity in our identities and our stories, both in a corporate way and in an individual way at the same time, and that both and is not often addressed in storytelling or even in our lived everyday lives. And so, you know, as Ruth points out here, it's this, there's this sort of curiosity maybe that people have, but they've already answered the question for themselves before they've even asked it. And
right.
So,
yeah, I mean, I think there's this obsession with the foreign, you know, or the, you know, the other. And I think a lot of times too, it's like, I think framing it, and we've been trying to be more cognizant of, it's like our heritage, you know, is Chinese, or citizenship is obviously American. I know sometimes it's like a mouthful, but you know.
We do have to recognize that people are, a lot of times, are not being intentionally, you know, racist or belligerent in wanting to assume that we're not American. I think a lot of times people just don't know, and they just don't know how to ask. And so, I mean, and I think that's probably up to us to be able to point out when someone says, well, where are you really from? You're like, well, my ethnic heritage is that, you know, I am Chinese, but, you know, we've been in America for a long time, you know, for many generations. And, you know, maybe that'll help, you know, because I think there are parts of this country where they don't see our faces very often. They only see our faces on TV or how we're stereotyped to be on TV. You know, like we work in industry, we work in the entertainment industry, and unfortunately Hollywood likes the foreign part of Asian faces. They don't necessarily like the American part of our face. You know, we're not very exotic to be American, but we're exotic and interesting, you know, if we're wearing period pieces, doing kung fu with beautiful clothes and speaking a foreign language, right? But when we act and talk and look just, you know, act and talk just like you and everybody else, we're not as
people don't, you know,
not as interesting,
not as interesting. And certainly I know we have a lot of mixed race people, and we got a question one time from, you know, a high school student or junior high student. He's like, well, I'm half Chinese and half American, and
where do I fit in?
Yeah, exactly. And so as you know, mixed race, you know, marriages are definitely commonplace now. I mean, I think for the future generations, I mean, these are questions of identity that can't be so simplified, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in this whole perpetual foreigner notion that if you don't look white or black, then you're always a foreigner. But you know, Larissa, even with that comment that you said with the students, you know, I'm half Chinese and half American, or is that white? You know, like and all American,
right?
And it's this ongoing inner work, and that's what I really appreciate about this film, is that there's so many intersections of generations of what it means to be Chinese American and Chinese and the Southerner, and you know.
Well, you know what's funny? I mean, we talked about this, and we might. I mean, some of you might even do it unconsciously. Not on purpose too. But like sometimes we'll say, like you say, your parents will say, like, you and your American friends. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the language that we use. I think I grew up, even though my parents are American citizens, they've been for since the 1960s.
And you were born here,
right?
So
I mean, they've been American
citizens
citizens longer than they were, when they were in China.
But
they
even,
still, in their vocabulary, they will say like, "Oh yeah, those Americans." It's like they also pit themselves as the American, like somebody who is white or black, you know, that is American. But those of us who are Asian aren't American. So it's even the language our families use at home.
So even fellow Asians don't think we're Americans. So when they talk to you, when they don't think we're Americans too.
So that wasn't normalized for me. So I grew up thinking like I wasn't. I mean, I am American by citizen, but like I'm not like a real American, right?
Yeah, my parents, who are American citizens, would always refer to non-Asians here as white-born, which is
right,
which is what they would call, you know, non-Chinese when they were in Taiwan. And I would always remind them, but you know, you are May-born, you're American, you know, and
right.
They're not white, you know, they're also Americans. They're not foreigners. You know, they live. So it's just, the language can be really intriguing in that way.
Yeah, it's that identity question. I'm sitting here thinking, for me, it was the opposite. My parents and my father never affirmed that they were any different. My dad would never say he was anything really except American. But then, and so it took me like 34 years to realize, why do I never feel like I quite fit in? So yeah, what a profound film, and really exploring the roots of some of that identity crisis.
You say your English is very good. Nice.
For someone from mainland China, don't even get me started about how we're not accepted in Asia. That's a whole nother can of worms, because we're not Asian enough when we go to Asia. We're not American enough when we're here, and that's why I made this film. But there's another film to be made for those with the specifically Asian audience. Yeah.
It's funny because like I'll have Chinese people, like they'll know I'm an ABC, you know, American born Chinese, and then I'll start speaking to them in Chinese all of a sudden, and then they'll be like, "Whoa, your Chinese is so good!" And then the next day I'll be talking to another friend or someone else that's not Asian, and I'll be speaking in English. "Whoa, you speak English so good!" I'm just like, "Whoa, I guess, yeah."
Yeah, Erica, did we miss any questions? I haven't scrolled through all of it.
Oh, there are many more questions. But I do think that at 5:15, if you guys if you are both generous enough to continue to stay, and your daughter is continuing to be engaged.
Let's do one or two more.
Yeah, we can take one or two more. We're happy. She's occupied right now.
Okay. Peter, did you want to officially close first, or?
Yeah, why don't I do that in that way? Because I think there are a few announcements that I do want to make, and that way those that are still on can catch that. And then if we can finish with a couple of questions that are still in the Q&A, that'd be great. How's that sound? So first of all, Baldwin and Larissa, so grateful for you to share your time with us and to have made this film. One of the comments I read on chat was this was the best 3 hours that I've spent in recently, and so I wholeheartedly agree with that. This conversation that has come forth from this has been so rich, and we hope sincerely that the conversation will continue. And thank you so much for being with us. And I want to also acknowledge and give, and I'm grateful for Katie for bringing your insights and reflections and joining us with our time together. And for our gathering team, Erica Bertling for leading the Q&A, Joyce Swaving and Sharon Crandall for helping with the Q&A as well. Jenny Goto, who found this film for us to show and spearheaded this film series. I'm really grateful for you to have done that. And Mel Soriano, who's been at the helm at Zoom with this as our Zoom host. Thank you so much for this going so smoothly. And Bishop Diane for being our diocesan host for this event. And thank you so much for valuing the Asian American storytelling, that you encourage us to have this space so that stories like this can be told and shared, and it empowers us to do more. So a few announcements. The conversation does continue on February 28th. We will have our next event, a panel conversation, Who Shall We Be? Theological reflections on being Asian Pacific American Christians in today's world. And there's more information. We'll put that on the chat. And there are other events that are on our website. Please check that out. We do want to do a little bit of cross-promoting. It's Black History Month, and we value shared learning. So next Saturday, our Union for Black Episcopalians will host a Absalom Jones Lessons in Spirituals. And so I think we can post some information on that, and please join that event. It's a very special event. And lastly, if you'd like to financially support our ministry so we can further expand and deepen these spiritual and cultural conversations, to have the space for APA spirituality, please give generously through the link in chat. That's all I have. Let's see, I had asked Erica to close in prayer, but Erica, do you want to do that now or after a few more questions?
I suppose we should probably let people go if they need to go, but I can read a few more questions before we, I suppose, officially close. I don't know.
Sounds good.
So for those of you, the other questions that have come in that have short answers just for clarification. Somebody was asking, what was the year that the great-grandfather Charles Chiu was born in San Francisco?
So Charles J. Lowe was my great-grandfather. He was born in 1877.
Okay.
So that means my great-great-grandfather, Jiu Mo, was obviously here already. And we think he was probably here in the 1860s.
Okay. And then Tom wanted to know where you grew up, you and your brother. Where actually in, yeah.
So San Francisco, me and my brother were both born in San Francisco, and then we moved to Sacramento shortly after
he was born.
After my brother was born. So I think I moved around 8 years old, and then we would go back to San Francisco a lot. So we would do San Francisco, Sacramento quite often. So we're kind of splitting it for a while before we, and now we're in LA.
And I'm from Diamond Bar.
Yeah,
so
my brother's down here, down south too now. So we left our parents all alone in Sacramento. I'm gonna visit you soon, I promise.
We would all love to see our parents sometime soon, I think.
Yeah.
It makes it difficult. Another thing in that same vein of family then is Stanley wanted to know about how your parents, especially your father, was, I guess, convinced, was generous enough to share the story in such a public way, but just keeping this within the family. And I know you addressed that a little bit with the first question about the power of telling your own family stories, but yeah.
Actually, we weren't. I think that was Larissa's greatest fear, that we do all this work and then my dad says, too personal.
I think the thing that at least he told me is, I think the component about the Chinese Exclusion Act, I think that really put it into context for him that this was something historically important for people to know. And that, like, I think for him, he's like, I'm so glad you have all that in there, because I think he liked the history, right? Like, the personal part is like, I don't know if I want people to see that, but like the history of it is what he really wants people to know. And I think that's where we kind of got his major stamp approval. And he's been very, very, very supportive.
Actually, he's also been really supportive because he's like, he's watched it so many times. I think almost after every time he watches it, he says, I am so glad that you brought out the Black experience, because I think it's so important for people to know about Chinese and Blacks together. And this is, coming from someone that doesn't necessarily have a strong, history. Like he wasn't the one that was living in Mississippi with the Black community, right? He lived in China for his childhood life, and then he moved to Oakland with his grandmother, and they lived in the Chinatown area. So it wasn't like he was raised or lived in a predominantly Black neighborhood, right? Yet he still loved that part of the story because he was in the military. He's obviously has a civilian job. Our neighbors were Black. We grew up. So so he just wanted that story so bad, and I never knew he wanted that story, But it was after the film was done, he actually said, "Oh, I'm really glad you did that."
Actually, and to your point about the immigration and the history piece of it, there's a question about that as well. Erin wants to know, she says, what struck me was how well your story shows how laws such as the Chinese Exclusion Act or Executive Order 9066, or also all the discriminatory laws against the African-American community, affect real people through generations, as Baldwin said, not just in the present, but down through future. Many of us know that's true in our own lives. So perhaps could you talk a little bit about your own family's experience that's impacted your perspective on the immigration dramas in this country, maybe in the past 20 years, especially since 9/11, and especially in the past 4 years? And somebody else did mention that, how so much of immigration law is built upon exclusion.
Yeah, I think the thing that I was surprised, and this again goes back to the education system not really teaching the origins of immigration. At least to my recollection, I remember Ellis Island, right? It's like, oh yes, all the Europeans, this is how they all came. They came through Ellis Island. They basically let you in unless you were sick and had disease, and that was true for pretty much everyone, right? Even on the West Coast, until Angel Island, until the Chinese Exclusion Act. And that was the beginning of a restrictive immigration system in our country. And I had no idea, and that's why I made it a point to have our historian, mention that. And so, Baldwin, you can speak to how you had no clue about this either, how it impacted your family directly.
Yeah, I mean, just the way for our family was like, how American really are we, right? So with the way education isn't taught to us, it kind of, as far as your question goes about immigration goes, it leads it to a complicated story or a complicated answer, because a lot of the Chinese were brought in here first legally, and then they were made illegal while they were already here. And then the complication comes late, it changes, because now as you kind of slowly move to modern day, we forget the reason that it started with the Chinese Exclusion Act, and then now it's kind of cast upon those who are south of the border that are Mexican, right? But then they don't understand that some of those implications are from the Chinese Exclusion Act and how it all kind of started. So going back to what Larissa said, I think the way we should view it is, if education shows these more, if our education system can show the consequences of these laws, how the laws were originally impacted or started, and that they were actually laws based on hate, unfortunately, laws based on fears, fears that we didn't know about, and if we knew those histories, then that would change the way we would make laws in the future, or even how we would change laws in the present. Because we got to remember, I mean, yes, it's true, our children are our future, right? So if we don't teach our children that, then we forget why the laws are enacted. So now that's why we have this whole thing about like, well, is it legal or is it not illegal? What constitutes legal? What constitutes illegal? When is, and at the same time, it's complicated because we have to acknowledge that it's probably not good to just open the borders and let everybody walk in or swim in or anything, right? There's got to be something. So how do you find that balance? How do we work with legislatures? How do we work with community groups? How do we do things so that things are done in a practical, loving, and fair way? And I think it opens up great conversations when we understand the history of how it all began.
So one more very quick question that I think many people are wondering. Did they give you the family Bible?
Oh, so yes.
Yes, it took a, yes, we did. Yes.
They gave us the Bible and my dad gave it back. So
it's on loan.
It's on loan
at the museum right now.
So it still belongs to us, but we signed it so that the museum can keep it at the museum. And so they kind of have the authority to help us keep it safe.
Yeah, when we were hoping, this is before COVID, we were originally hoping when we were releasing the film that we would maybe have the Bible even do a little tour at different museums. There's like the Bible Museum in New York, and I'm not New York, sorry, DC. And then there's, the various Asian museums and even the Smithsonian in DC, which I have a relationship with. Like we were hoping to do a traveling exhibit with the Bible and other, artifacts from the Mississippi Delta. But, given current conditions, that might have to wait. But we do have it. It took a little while to get the Bible because of ownership things.
It's at the Tenement Museum. So there's a website you can go to.
There's a virtual exhibit, digital exhibit, and all of you, I encourage you to contribute your stories. The Tenement Museum has a digital exhibit called Your Story, Our Story, or is it Our Story, Your Story?
One of those.
It's
it's the museum in New York. So.
Tenement Museum, where you can upload a picture of your family artifact and write a little story. They had curated like 50 objects specifically and reached out to us a few years back about the Bible and the letterhead from the grocery store. But you also can contribute your stories to their museum.
So if you want to see an up close pictures of the Bible from different angles and then read a little bit more about the Bible, you can go to the Tenement Museum and you can see it.
Their website.
Since you can't probably fly out to Mississippi to look at it in real life.
But if you ever go down to they are right, like I think upon appointment, I think you could still go into the Mississippi Delta Heritage Museum if you ever find yourself in Cleveland, Mississippi.
We want to see Casey Lou's Bible. They'll know exactly what you're talking about.
Great, thank you.
We should probably get going now because I think my daughter's probably getting hungry.
I'm looking at Peter. If Peter has anything else,
No. Thank you so much for this time, and we definitely look forward to the conversation to continue. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having us. Hopefully we'll see you guys. Let's do this again when we can go live.
Yeah.
In person. We would love to do that in person since we're in LA.
Fly everyone in, whoever attended today. So no promises.
We'll come out to Alabama too. Katie.
Yeah.
Larissa, can you close our time in prayer? Send us forth.
Sure. Lord God, thank you for being the author of all of our stories. Thank you for giving us created truth. Thank you for making us beloved. May we go forth from here with more confidence in our own stories of belovedness so that we can share that belovedness with those around us in a way that they can fully live into their authentic selves and us as well. Thank you for Larissa and Baldwin being with us today and sharing of themselves and their families in a way that has blessed us all so much. Go with us now. And thank you for being the one that it is in you that we live and move and have our being. In the name of Christ, amen.